Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Amy Crossland from Canada. It's a while since we've had a Canadian. Do you call them Canucks? What is that? Is that crazy Canucks?
Yeah,
Yeah, crazy Canucks. Is that what they call the ice skaters? What's it?
yeah.
Ice hockey.
The NHL team in Vancouver is called the Vancouver Canucks. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Canucks. Yeah. Okay. I went to Vancouver years ago. I thought it was a really clean city. It's the cleanest city
Yeah, it's a beautiful place. I really enjoy Vancouver. It's very expensive to live there now, but it is a nice place to visit for sure.
Yeah. So before we started, before I hit the record button, we were talking, listeners, about a potential topic, following on from a conversation I had with Amy a couple of months ago, and we came up with this. Or you mentioned this phrase, deconstructing beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
So, why is that? Why do you think that's important? Why is that being important for you? Why do you think that's important for us? What's the deal about deconstructing beliefs?
Deconstruction. Yeah, I think. Well, I've been in reunion with my first mom. It's been 25 years this spring, and I think as such, reunion takes kind of phases. It goes in phases. And so the first part of reunion is always that honeymoon phase. It's almost a blur because it's just almost unbelievable that you're, reuniting with your mom. And I kind of call it that fight or flight place where you're just trying to figure out all these new relationships and try to survive. And then you settle into this place of maybe not so much depth, but you feel a little bit more settled in it. So you feel safe in that place. So you stay there for a while. And then if reunion goes on, I think that for me, reunion became a place where I started to have feelings and thoughts that I never had until I was in reunion, because you have that physical representation of the person that you've always thought about and wondered about, and you discover that she's a real person. So as you continue in relationship, I think that there's always more themes, more thoughts, more feelings that come up. And so you get to a place where you start to look back and start to think about some of the moments, I guess, or some of the thoughts and feelings that you had in reunion throughout. For me, I've been in therapy for the last few years. And so I think I am in a place where I've cleared a lot of the chaos. And so I've had more room to look back on some of those times, and I'm older now too, a little bit more settled in my life. And so, yeah, it's been a lot about deconstruction for me, looking back at some of those themes and thoughts and feelings. And I've been able to then now be in a better place to kind of work through them. And it's helped me to, just examine, I think we talked about this, like unconscious biases that I held about adoption that I didn't even realize that I was holding, like about my own adoption, which was very surprising to me. And I think it's made me, my view has shifted a lot on different things. And I really realized that I was kind of conforming to mainstream adoption culture, which I was so proud of the fact that I didn't think I was. So it's really helped me to look at some of the themes that I was holding in my own life about adoption.
Right. Wow. I say white with a bit of foreboding there. There's so much there. It's like, what do I dive in for? First thing is an easy one. Is this? You talk about this physical representation. So before we hit the record button, I was saying that I've been checking you out on Instagram so that I can put the link in the show notes, and how much your daughters look like you. And
yes.
You said, and you look exactly the same as your birth mother. You got very strong genes. So this physical representation has been a very solid thing.
It has.
Yeah.
I think that was one of the things that I actually looked back on when I was talking about deconstructing some of the feelings that I had, was really the first time that I met my mom as my mom in the first time that we physically reunited. And again, that period of time was there was a lot of hard things that particular weekend. So I hadn't really taken much time to actually think about some of the thoughts that I was having then. But as of late, that is one of the moments I think that I really look back on, is that first time that I actually met her physically. And it was, I could see that this person looked like me. I didn't really know anybody else, or had not had anybody else in my life. I mean, I could have passed in my adoptive family. It's not that I looked so totally different, but I think looking at my mom, because we do represent each other very much, looking at someone that looks like you, and also just knowing that you've come from that person, and she's your mom, but she's a stranger to you. And then I was a stranger to her. I think that moment, when I think back on it now, how I felt, like it felt terrible, actually. Like there was just this sense of like, how did this happen? How can I be looking at my mom, and how can this woman be my mom, and I'm her daughter, and we don't know each other? And everybody else around us was seemingly celebratory about it. Everybody just seemed to think this was the most wonderful thing. Like I had this wonderful childhood, and now here we were reuniting, and what could possibly be, sad about it? And on the inside, I was feeling the opposite of that. I felt, it felt terrible. It felt heavy. And I knew kind of that's when things started to unravel for me, even if I maybe didn't know it at the time.
Yeah. So, was it were you expecting it to be different to that?
Yes, I think that's one of the big things. I think if you ask my mom, she would tell you the same thing, is that I think we both held expectations of how that reunion was going to go. I think it's really important to make note of the fact that when you see those reunion shows on TV, I mean, those were that was the only reference I ever had. And I think in my mind, I thought, oh gosh, I don't know, actually really know what I thought. I was 18. And so I went into it pretty naively, but I think that I just thought, okay, well, we'll meet. And I don't know, maybe somewhere in the back of my mind, I thought, well, we'll just kind of pick up and start this relationship, and it'll be, just kind of this extra family that I have, and everything will be great. And I think that I don't think she thought that in particular, but I think that she thought she was going to feel more for me, as I felt like I was going to feel more for her. And then when that weekend came and we met, and it was very obvious that we were both going to struggle, I think we were both felt really sad about that. And I know my mom has said she just felt a lot of guilt about that, because, I was her child, but it's like I made mention before, she didn't know me either. And I think that that's so heavy. And so the expectations for us were not met. And there's a lot of guilt and shame about that.
Yeah. Well, I'm struggling with this on the basis that I have no lived experience of reunion. I've got no benchmark. I think, did I mention before that I got a letter from Canada, I don't know, 2012, maybe something around that, 2015 actually, probably, to say that my birth mother had died. So I have no experience. When normally we're talking about stuff on this show that I have a gauge point to, but with this I have none.
Well, I have found that that's kind of part of the, not issue, I don't want to call it an issue, but like I said, I've been doing this for 25 years, and I know just from kind of immersing myself in the adoptee community in the last few years, whether it be podcasts or, literature, or connecting myself kind of in my own community with other adoptees, I really am sort of a unicorn. in a way, because I don't know anybody else that has been in reunion for as long as I have been. And so I think and I'm sure there are people, but I just personally have never come across anyone. And so for me, navigating this has also been, I mean, I am living the experience, but I think your experience is probably, I don't want to say more common, but yeah, like I know I think that's part of been the challenge for me, is that I have been navigating this in kind of an isolated way. It's not something that happens very often. I mean, most reunions don't come to fruition, or they're very casual, or they don't last. So it has been a very challenging experience for me, even though I'm living it. I haven't had a lot of guidance, I guess. I don't know if there is guidance for it, but yeah, so
yeah, it's made up. It's been made up, right?
it has,
like
yeah.
like your kids didn't come with a manual, but you could buy a book about raising kids,
Yes.
you know, that there's because it was, you said it was tricky at the start, and it took a long while to settle down.
It did.
But now you know how would you describe it now?
Yeah, I think that probably present day, our relationship is probably the best that it's ever been. But it is getting back to that that root of expectations and deconstruction work. I think that reunion, another myth, well, I shouldn't say a myth, but it does take a lot of commitment on both parties, you know, like it takes a lot of commitment on, you know, has from myself and from my mom, but it also takes a lot of commitment to self. There's a lot of self-reflection, vulnerability that has to happen. There's a lot of reflection on difficult things, sitting in hard feelings, and so both people have to kind of be willing to do that. And so I think that again is also difficult, because sometimes you're not in the same place, and that's often been the case for us, especially in the beginning, that we weren't always in the same place. But I think we definitely are more together on that now. And something that I've had to do with, like, going back, I said to the deconstruction, is to ask myself what I've actually believed to be true about myself in my adoption. So you know, one of the things is, it's like the age-old adoptee thing, is the being wanted and the rejection and the abandonment piece. And especially in a closed adoption, I think the challenge is that you're kind of given that narrative of, you know, you were better off, you have a better life, and these are your parents now, and your old identity doesn't matter, because attached to that is like, that would have been worse if you would have been your original person, you know? So somewhere along the way, as a child or as a baby, even though I always knew I was adopted, and like I said, you were like, you're so loved, you're chosen, all of those things, inherently, I think that you have this belief that, well, my mom actually didn't really love me, you know, and I would have been worse off with her. My life would have been terrible if I would have stayed with her. And then you fast forward all these years to reunion, and even though when I met my mom it was very difficult, I also met the rest of my extended family, my grandma, aunts and uncles, cousins, and they were lovely. They were lovely and loving and warm and welcoming. And I remember thinking, well, they're not terrible people. And even though things were hard with my mom, she wasn't terrible. And so I started to think, like, would my life have been like, what was I actually being saved from? And then you start to think, well, what else is false then? Like, what else are beliefs that I've held that are false? And I think when you start to realize, like, for me, it was like, well, this isn't the way I imagined it. This isn't what I've always believed. This is what people have led me to believe, or didn't stop me from believing. And now that's not true. So what else isn't true? And so that's kind of, for me, what has been really challenging. And I think for my mom and I in our relationship, that's been really challenging, because like, I actually held the belief that, well, my mom didn't really love me. And then when we reunited, because it was so hard off the hop, and I realized, I mean, I've cleared enough space now that I realize it's also been very hard for her as the first mom, you know. We have very different lived experiences, but she's also struggling with her own loss and shame and all of that. But I know that I also, like, I did believe that perhaps she didn't love me, and because, like I said, it was so hard, we struggled to kind of find that connection in the beginning. But as time has gone on and as work has been put in, of course she loves me, like, and I had to really come around that, to be like, okay, my mom does love me, and I have to, like, I was not accepting of that love, you know. I was not accepting of it, because I held that belief that she didn't love me, she never could love me, that it wouldn't even be on the table, that she would love me. And so when she first told me that verbally, I remember thinking, oh, like, I was taken off, it took me off guard, you know. So those are things that I've had to work on, and allow those, you know, those when I think to myself, oh, that's not something that's not what I thought this was. And then I've had to kind of be like, okay, well, what did I actually believe about that then to be true? And I've had to kind of sit in those things and work my way through them.
Phew. I mean, it sounds like more like a marriage in some ways.
Oh God, yes, that's actually a very good, I've actually used that comparison before, because we've had to be committed to one another. And I've often said that we've had to choose one another over and over and over again, you know, like, just like a marriage. I mean, you're married, as am I. And I don't know about your marriage, but, you know, mine, I love my husband, but there's often times and I'm just like, oh my God, you know, you have to just get up in the morning or whatever and be like, okay, I choose to love you today, even though I might not agree with you, or you really annoyed me, or whatever. It's always choosing one another. And I think with my mom and I, it's been the same thing. I think that we've had to just continually choose one another. And I mean, that's getting easier. Like, I would say today, compared to, you know, 10, 15, 20 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, that for me now, I feel like we're in a place it's moved more mother-daughter now than maybe marriage, but like, for a long time, it was very much like a marriage.
Yeah. But the thing is, you didn't have to stick with it.
No.
You
Well,
used
I wanted
to quite a lot, but you didn't have to. Like,
no, I didn't.
So
I didn't,
something's, you know, behind you, something's driven you.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I have been asked that a lot. Like, you know, why didn't you just quit? Because I felt like it multiple times. And like I said, there were different periods throughout our relationship that definitely we weren't connected at all. You know, like, I think, like I said, when I had my first daughter, probably for those first 5-6 years, we didn't really have a lot of contact. Things were really tough for both of us personally. Like, we were also kind of navigating some other things personally. And so those were the times where I was just like, oh, I don't really need this in my life. Like, this is just a lot of extra stress, and why am I bothering? But I had also formed quite close bonds to my extended family. So like I had mentioned before, like my grandma and my aunts and uncles, my cousins. I'm the oldest cousin. And so I've had the pleasure and the joy of watching my little cousins. Some of them don't even, I mean, some of them were babies when I came into their life, so they don't even remember what life was like before me. And so I think having those bonds was something that really helped me through those tough times, because I thought to myself, how would I ever be able to say to my grandma, well, I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore, or or my little cousins, like, sorry, I've been in your life and now I'm just gonna like vanish, like I think that for me, that was a real lifeline.
Yeah. The it's interesting what you said there, because I thought you were going to stick with it. Well, I thought you were going to say something about tenacity and the fact that you'd waited to 18, and so you weren't going to give up that easily, or something like
Yeah.
that.
Well, I am tenacious. I am, and that is the other part. Like I sometimes I don't know when to quit, which maybe has served me well in this regard too.
Yeah, I have that. I'm tenacious as well, and I get lock on, right? Like my mind is set on something, and sometimes I don't change course early enough.
Yes.
So I miss, like something goes, I stick with stuff too long.
Yeah, I would say that sometimes I'm a sucker for punishment. I don't know if that's a phrase to use, but I tend to, that's something that I'm probably, I don't want to say guilty of, but yeah, kind of guilty of. But yeah, those bonds were really important to me, but also I think that somewhere inside of me, even as a young adult, like when I was 18 or 19, when I started on this road, I knew that inherently I didn't want to be in and out of their life. Like I didn't want to have a casual reunion. Like I am very much like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it. I'm like that in my life, like with pretty much anything. So if I choose to do something, I'm going to do it. And I did not want to have that sort of, that kind of like in and out. I didn't want it to be casual. I just thought to myself, like, if I'm going to re-enter into this family, then I want to do it so that I can actually be a member of this family,
Yeah, you were all in, right?
I was all in, yeah.
All in. And I can't remember how relationships are with your adoptive mum. Is that you? Are you still in?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I still have relationships with relationship with my parents, my dad and my mom, my adoptive parents. It's been tricky. Like there's definitely been challenges there. And I think again, as I've deconstructed, there's been more and more things that I've come to light in my mind about my relationship with my parents. And I was born in 1980. Like I know it was a closed adoption. I know things were very different then. There wasn't a lot of education or even maybe literature or anything about what it might be like to raise an adopted child and what that might mean for the future. I really understand that that wasn't the case. And so I've had to have a lot of grace in that regard, or like grant that grace. But I also think that I have changed a lot. Like I've done a lot of work on myself, and I've done a lot of hard work on myself. And I'm not afraid to have difficult conversations. I think that I've had to have a lot of difficult conversations. And I've tested the waters a lot with my mom, especially my adoptive mom. And sometimes that's been met with I don't know. I don't know if it's fear or if it's just the generation that she's in. I don't know. But I've come to a place where I just realize, like, those are things I just can't discuss with her. I can't discuss them with her. And so I've accepted that. And I mean, I'm thankful I have my other mom in my life, because we do and are able to have difficult conversations. And so I just kind of, I've kind of tried to, I mean, it's difficult. It is difficult to navigate these different relationships. And, you know, you always have that guilt and that fear of what people are going to think if you're being disloyal or unloving, and, you know, all of that kind of stuff to your parents. But also I've had to just kind of root myself in my own beliefs about who I am and the work that I've done, and just kind of, offer as much grace as I can, but also honor my own space and growth and healing.
Yeah. I'm not going to ask a silly question like how do you navigate those relationships, right? I was listening to another podcast today. It wasn't an adoption one, but the guy said how, and I just thought, oh, come on, you know, that as best we can.
As best we can.
That silver bullet question about how.
Yeah.
So I'll ask you another one. Do you think that beliefs get deconstructed, or do you think that we deconstruct them?
I think we deconstruct them.
Yeah.
I think that because if I'm being honest, there are a lot of people that will hold the same beliefs through their life. And there's nothing, you know, I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but for me, I've had to, in order to survive and survive well in a reunion and in my life, I feel like deconstruction has been necessary. It's been such hard work, but I think it's been necessary work in order to survive and to navigate these relationships. And so I'm thankful that I've been in a place that I can do that, because it has been a huge survival tool for me, because I am able to maybe hold a lot more grace for the people in my life than if I had not deconstructed these beliefs. And I am thankful that my beliefs have changed, because I think it has helped me to then have a really loving and full relationship with my mom, you know, with my first mom. But, you know, 20 years ago, perhaps I wasn't able to do that because my beliefs were as they were.
So you've talked about reflection, and you talked about therapy. Are those the main how-tos in terms of how you deconstructed your beliefs?
Yeah, therapy definitely has been a game changer for me. I mean, I waited almost 20 years to do it before I was kind of brave enough to do it. But man, am I ever glad that I did. It's really been the best gift, I think, that I've given myself. It hasn't always felt like a gift, but I think it definitely has, because she has helped me organize my thoughts and kind of work through them, which has then allowed me to be able to reflect. And every time I leave her office, it's like she's planted some sort of, not planted, I don't want to make it sound like she's, you know, brainwashed me or anything, but it's like she leaves me with a thought, I think purposefully, so that when I leave, that's something that I'm able to then reflect and think about and kind of till our next session. And that has really helped me organize, because it feels insurmountable. I remember when I first started therapy, I thought, my God, how am I ever going to get through all this? Like, it just feels like this insurmountable pile of whatever. And I just remember thinking, I'm never going to be able to sort through this. But she's helped me kind of sort through it step by step, which has then helped me to reflect. So yeah, I think that it's moved me out of the chaos for sure, which has then helped me, deconstruct in a more reflective way.
So the biggest, or one of the biggest shifts that you've alluded to is the fact that you've gone from she didn't love me,
mm-hmm.
to she does love me.
Yes.
So for me, that's like one of the most fundamental beliefs.
It is.
So can you remember when, well, was there a particular moment that you remember that you, when you noticed, when you became aware of the shift of immutability?
Yeah, it was, I can't remember really the date or time, but I remember the moment. It was we were just on the phone because, we talk on the phone every few weeks, and it was just a regular catch up. It was just a regular phone call that we were having, just, um, discussing, life and etc., catching up, whatever. And so at the end of the conversation, as you hang up, you're getting ready to hang up, there's always sort of a lull.
Yeah.
Where you're going to say goodbye. And so we were getting to the end, and there was a little bit of a lull. And then all of a sudden my mom was like, I love you, verbally. And she had written it in cards before, and like a birthday card or whatever, but she never said it out loud to me. And I could tell, like, when she said it, it was awkward for her. Not awkward because she didn't feel that way, but just because it was not something that she'd ever said out loud. And of course, when you say something like that for the first time, there's a vulnerability, taking a bit of a risk saying it. And she said it, and I remember being taken off guard. Like, honestly, in that moment when she said I love you, I was like, oh, I just was not expecting it. And I don't even remember if I said it back. I can't even remember, but I remember getting off the phone after and just like sitting in that for a bit and thinking like, oh my gosh, like she does, like, she loves me. And I think it's all of these, fast forward all these years later, I think I mentioned that before, where I've actually thought back to that moment, and because I've made room to reflect on those moments, and I've often thought to myself, why was I taken so off guard in that when she said those words? And it's like I said, it's because I honestly, if I was being honest with myself, I actually didn't think that was even a thing. Like, I didn't even think that was on the table.
Wow.
That she would love me. And then I started thinking about my own motherhood, because I have two daughters, and I remember thinking when they were born, I didn't really know them either. I mean, I've been carrying them around for 9 months, but I hadn't seen their faces. I hadn't, any of that. But I remember having them and thinking, like, I don't know this little person, but I know I'd step in front of a truck for them, in that moment. So then why would my mom feel any different about me? Like, of course she loved me. And it was just, anyway, it was like that moment. And then really since that time, since that phone conversation that we had, like, there's not been one time that we've hung up the phone or I've left her or she's left here, like, from me, that she always says it. She's never not said it since. Like, she's very consistent in it. And it's like, I love it. I realized just like how much I really needed to hear those words, and I love it. And I never get sick of hearing it, but it sometimes takes me off guard. Like, I still am like, oh my gosh, like, she does love me.
So, I mean, are we talking a couple of years in? Are we talking about 5 years in? When was that?
Like, it was probably like that conversation probably happened, I want to say it was probably like 7 or 8 years ago.
Right. So we're
And like I
17
said,
to 18 years in.
yeah, it was like
Wow.
a while in, but like I said, she had written it before. It was just the verbalizing of it out loud was the first time. And yeah, it really, like, I always say, and I have often said, that being seen and known and loved by my mom has changed my life. It really has. And it's not something that like I said, when I expected going in, I didn't even think about that, but it has really changed my life. And hearing those words from her is still so meaningful to this day. And it continues to kind of chip away at me, I think, every time I hear them.
Wow. So you talked about another belief earlier on, which was the belief that you would have been better.
Mm-hmm.
You would have been, you were, the adoption gave you a better life.
Yeah.
Was that one of the beliefs that was deconstructed as well?
Yes. Yeah, I think because we can't know that. There's no way of knowing that to be true. And I know that my life would have been different with my first mom, for sure. It would not have been the same, but I don't think it would have been worse. It would have just been different. And I think there's a real danger in allowing children to believe that that somehow their life would have been bad or terrible with their first family or their first mom.
And was there a moment, do you remember that that shift, the shift?
Yeah, I think it's kind of was shortly after, my mom told me she loved me, and as when I started therapy, I think that kind of was a shift where I started to realize that, man, that's something that I held for a long time. Because I thought, oh gosh, well, I was obviously saved from a bad situation or something less than. And I think that's what has one of the most difficult things to turn around was planted from that, is that you start to feel like somehow your relationships would have been less than, and so then now when I've been forming these relationships in my adult life, with my mom especially, and with the rest of my family, that there's always this thought that has lingered that I wasn't super aware of, but have become more aware of, is that there is this thought that these relationships, or people view these relationships as less than perhaps, with my adoptive parents or in my adopted circle life, that these relationships are not as good as, and you kind of hold on to that because that belief that, your life would not have been as good as. And so it kind of transfers into your life as you are trying to form and navigate these new relationships.
That the reason I got up, if you're wondering what I was doing, we've got a puppy next door, and she's like, is she tearing the place apart? So I thought, well, shall I press hold? And I thought I'd just look out the window. For me, but I was listening clearly, and I'm going to prove that because it seemed to me that basically, better than it comes down to that judgment piece, as in adoptive mothers are better than birth mothers. It comes. Mm-hmm. It's as fundamental as that. That's what kind of came through to me, because the person responsible for that life is, I don't know, am I making sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. And that also, to follow up with that, I think you're right. There's this very long held belief that, you have these adoptive parents, they're married, they can't have children of their own. They really want children, and they're financially stable. All of the things. They're like they're the pillar of stability. And so what you've been taught, or what has been held true since you were born, is that these people who are strangers essentially to you are more worthy to raise you than your own mom.
Yeah. And I think for me, I'm a little bit, 13 years older. For me, it was the single family thing, mm-hmm. Single mother families.
Yeah,
that was it was two parents are better than one.
Yes,
and that was the main. I think that was the main driver. and the economic things as well, the
Yes.
financial position. I think those for me are the biggest, were the biggest drivers back in that day. Whereas now, I was talking to another Canadian, Josie, who's going to be on the show soon, and she's a little bit older than even me, right? She's on, but she was talking. She was asking me about adoption in the UK and some questions, and what was the reason for it? And I said, well, it was two parents are better than one, and financial stuff. That was that was the main kind of drivers back in the 60s. Whereas now, the drivers for adoption, well, there's less voluntary adoptions, I would imagine, and it's more to do with, like a problem with addiction or neglect, something like that. And so it's a state intervention rather than, because in the UK, single mums get far more social services support than they used to do, and they are not as stigmatized.
Yes. Well, and I often think, I think that something else I've reflected on is, my mom was 18 when she had me. So that was 1980. And in 1980, people were getting married young and having children young. Like there was probably people who were getting married at her age and having children at her age or a little bit older, So I often think to myself, had somebody just offered her a little bit of help and support at that time, like just, this is not ideal, obviously, having a baby this young, but like, let me help you, let me support you a bit. And, in 2 years, she'd have been 20. And then she's not a teenager anymore. And so I think one of the biggest things for me is that adoption is lifelong. Those couple years would have been hard, undoubtedly, maybe longer than that. I don't know. Obviously I'll never know, but yeah, those years would have been difficult, but had there just been a little bit of support offered and a little bit of help offered to get her to a place at like 20 or whatever, then it's a moot point. Like it doesn't matter. But adoption is for life. Like this has caused lifelong heartache, lifelong challenges. It's generational, it never goes away. And so, I don't know, sometimes that really makes me sad, because I think that people who are not adopted or, aren't first moms, that doesn't even register in their mind that this is a lifelong thing.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, what would have happened for me not to be adopted? Like you just said, well, if you didn't be, you get merciful. So if my birth mother and birth father had been going out for 5 months, and she told him that she was pregnant and he didn't want anything to do with it. So all it would have taken for me not to be adopted was for him to have stood by it, and in those days married her. That's all it would take. So the logistics, right? So if that's all it would have taken, right, it wasn't about her not loving me. It was logistics.
Yeah, totally. And
so it's all about meaning. Nothing.
It totally is. And that's something that I've come to realize, especially in the last few years, that it had nothing to do with her not loving me. It just had more to do with, the circumstances at the time, and which is super unfortunate, because also, it's had such a huge impact. It's had such a huge impact on my life as it has hers, and I've seen that more and more as I've gotten older. And as I've traveled through this, that her life has also been very much affected by that loss, and still is.
Yeah. So what I was thinking about as you were talking there, a key belief thing, or a key insight opener for me was, and I don't quote Shakespeare because I couldn't understand it when I was doing it at school, right? But a Shakespeare play, no one. But they'll throw a line, and it's something like, nothing has any meaning other than the meaning we give it.
Yeah.
And we're taking an awful amount. We're taking an awful lot personally as a human race.
Yes.
And we're making it about us when it was really about, it wasn't even about them. It was about the circumstances.
Yes.
And how that belief, this is kind of, I talk about this quite a lot at the moment. So if we think of, and it's because we've got this new puppy, that's why it's on the mind, right? She's our fourth dog. The first two have died. The third one's still alive. We've got a fourth one, right? But I remember, sorry, listeners, if I said this, I've been talking about it a lot, so I apologize, but it's a big thing, right? The fourth one, I haven't heard her cry at night, but I heard the first one, the second one, and the third.
Yeah.
At night. When, especially the first night, right? So for me, that kind of sends shivers down my spine. That kind of sums up in a rather woeful example, adoption trauma, right? So but the how does that feeling become a belief that our birth mother didn't love us enough?
Mm-hmm.
There seems to be that's a huge journey.
It is a huge journey.
It's a huge journey.
Yeah, it is a huge journey. And I like I said, since I've been doing this a really long time, and my mom and I are quite close now, like present day. And like I know that she loves me. Like I don't doubt that any longer. Like that, I don't doubt it. I know that she loves me. I know that she's happy I'm in the world. I know she doesn't regret having me, I know that, but I also know that she holds a lot of her own sadness and loss and grief and shame. And that's something that, she's always going to have, I think, on some level. And that makes me sad because I just think, like, you're right. It's circumstances. It wasn't because she was bad. It wasn't because she, committed the worst sin in the world. Like, probably which she held those beliefs, like those were the beliefs that she held because that's what people impressed upon her. And so here we are all these years later. And she has those feelings, and it just makes me sad because you're absolutely right. Like, it's not because, she didn't love me. It's not because she was bad. It's not because, she did anything wrong. It's just what it was. And it's had this like massive effect, still all these years later.
But I think it's really, what do we do with these beliefs, right? So I was talking about this to somebody else the other day. It seems like there's an inkling, right? So I was thinking about this, like the inkling. So something goes off in our little 2-year-old brain, 4-year-old brain, 7-year-old brain. Something lands for us. Maybe it's something that's pressed on, as you say. pressed upon us by others, because most beliefs start, well, all beliefs start from the outside. There's no such thing. I think there's no such thing as a second-hand insight. We have to have them for ourselves. But every single belief is a hand-me-down. They're all second-hand or third-hand.
They are, yeah.
So I was thinking, like, to me, it started like, well, it starts off like a snowflake, right? And then more snow lands, and we're picking this thing up, and it becomes like a snowball, and then we're rolling it along. We're rolling it along the ground, and it's picking up more and more snow, and it's the base for a snowman, and that is the construction of the belief. So the deconstruction of it is about getting bringing it into the light of awareness, out of the shame of the darkness, out of the subconscious, bring it out into the light with reflection, with therapy, and like it's like bringing an industrial heater, to this big 4-foot wide snowball, and then but it doesn't go straight away, right? Like we're keeping the heat on it, we're keeping talking on it, keeping talking about it. That's what we're doing on the podcast, and that's why I'm staying with this metaphor, listeners, right? And it melts, and it becomes water, and then we keep the heat on it, and it becomes vapor, and then it's gone, because it was made of thought. That's all it was.
Yeah, shame is probably the greatest, the greatest and the heaviest load to bear in an adoption. I think just overall shame is at the root of all of the hard and bad and sad feelings, and shame cannot survive if it's pulled into the light. So I think I totally think that's a great analogy, and you're right. The more that we talk about it, and the more that we pull it into the light, the less power it holds over us and others.
And so something I figured out just last week is this. So my belief was, she didn't love me enough to keep me, right? So, and it came out as anger, right? The flip side of that is that I'm unlovable, which is the shame bit. So the two sides of the same coin. And people, like a few therapists have told me this recently, that anger is shame in drag or something like that. And that's how, and that's what it is, right? It's about our unlovability. And shame isn't just the biggest thing for adoptees, it's the biggest thing for humans. Like, so there's this scale of human consciousness, and it goes from noise. I talk about this quite a lot. So Power versus Force by David Hawkins is the book, and it's a scale of consciousness from 0 to 1,000. Right, 0 is dead, and 1,000 are the great, religious avatars. But it's not a religious thing, right? Your unconditional love is about 550. Shame is 20. Shame is 20, and dead is 0. So there's nothing between, and that's that shame piece and death. That's why we see that. That's why we see the suicide rates amongst adoptees. It's the most profound. It's the lowest level of consciousness. So how that lovability, how do you see those two things? The she didn't love me and I'm unlovable. How do you see those things going together?
Yeah, so it's like you said, like I think sometimes maybe even like I'm unlovable came before she doesn't love me, so it's like I'm unlovable, so my own mom doesn't even love me. And therefore it goes, goes on like that. So that has been a real stretch for me to start to offer myself love and start to accept love, from myself, from my mom, like from my husband, like from people around me. I think that I always unconsciously had this like very distinct wall around me. And I think I believe that like I actually don't really need love. I like, my husband and I actually chat about this now, because he's been with me. We've been together 23 years, married for 20. So he probably obviously knows me very well. And he said, you probably need more love than anybody, but you have always kind of put forth this belief, or this kind of whatever you want to call it, that I actually don't need like love. I'm okay. I don't need love as much as somebody else. Which I think was just me protecting myself,
Wow. Yeah. Oof. Did he have to fight against that in the early days?
Yeah, he did. Like we talk about it now, and I think in the beginning, he didn't like, as we've been together and as I've walked this road, because like I said, he's walked this road with me almost as long, but in the beginning, he also had no reference about adoption or my life experiences, like, etc. So I think he just thought that he took it personally, where it was kind of like I was a very kind of hardened and like, I'm not a super affectionate person, or I wasn't. That just wasn't who I was. And that's what I told myself, like, this just isn't me. And I mean, to some degree it's true. Like, I'm not a super affectionate person even to this day, but I'm certainly a lot better and more open-hearted about it. But I think back then he did take it quite personally. But I think as he's stuck with me and as I've walked through this, and he has seen the change in me just from like doing the work, and he can start to see now, especially, that like, actually that wasn't the case. That was just, for me, a protective mechanism. And yeah, I think he's a good guy. he's stuck with me through all of this, and he's really, even though he doesn't understand what it is to be adopted, he certainly has at least tried, and I'm thankful for that, because yeah, I'm sure I wasn't the easiest to be around at sometimes, and to stick with. So
well, it's all sticking, isn't it? It's you sticking with your mum's sticking with you, with your husband sticking with you. It's like, yeah, maybe we should call it stickability.
Stickability.
Stickability. Yeah. So I'm conscious of time. Is there anything that you'd like to share?
I think, like, just, if anybody is listening and they think that they hold those beliefs that they're not lovable, like that they aren't worth loving, and that they can never be loved, or maybe they believe that their mom didn't love them. I guess I just want people to understand that you're worth the work, and you're worth the time, and that you are loved, and you are lovable, and that there is a way to kind of like work your way out of those beliefs, to change your own beliefs. And I just want to offer encouragement, I guess, to anybody who might be thinking those things, that you are loved, and you are worth the work.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks so much, Amy. It's been brilliant. And thank you to listeners. We will speak to you again very soon. Take care.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Welcome. Bye.